Good evening. It's Australia's deadliest terror attack in 30 years. Two terrorists opened indiscriminate fire on Jewish holidaymakers celebrating the first day of their festival on the Sydney beach. 15 people, including a 10-year-old child and an 87-year-old Holocaust survivor, died. The Holocaust survivor died shielding his wife from the bullets of terrorists. This shooting raises some very uncomfortable questions about the spread of the cancer of radical Islamist terror across the world, and that's our top focus story. A deadly terror attack in Australia, a grim reminder for the world. A suspected Pakistan link to the Sydney massacre is under investigation. Jews singled out, targeted and killed.
I must have heard, I don't know, maybe like 40, 50 shots. I don't know, I still have to process it.
Maybe it's like a one-time shooting, not like it's not America, like not a massacre event, but turns out it was, and the whole shop just like stood up and we all just ran into the back exit and everyone was pushing everyone. There was no like semblance and we just ran in through.
Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese recognizes the evil anti-Semitism.
What we saw yesterday was an act of pure evil, an act of terror, an act of anti-Semitism. An attack on the first day of Hanukkah, targeted at the Jewish community. We are stronger than the cowards who did this. The government is prepared to take whatever action is necessary. Included in that is the need for tougher gun laws.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warns, don't ignore Jew hate.
The Australian government's policy was promoting and encouraging anti-Semitism in Australia.
Anti-Semitism terror, a global threat. That's our top focus on India First. And you just heard Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hit out at the Australian government, saying about 4 months ago, in August, he had written to the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, saying that his government policies were promoting and encouraging anti-Semitism in Australia. Reports in Australia say the shooters were of Pakistani origin. Of course, we are waiting for an official confirmation. The global focus, once again, is on Pakistan's state-sponsored radical Islamist terror. But is there need for closer scrutiny on the threat of this radical Islamist mindset represented by the ideology and actions of the Islamic State or ISIS? We debate that. Coming up at 8:30 tonight, 8 months after the deadly Pahalgam terror attack, where Hindus were singled out and massacred by Pakistani terrorists, reflecting the same radical Islamist mindset. The NIA has filed its charge sheet. We get you details of the conspiracy. I'm Gaurav Sawant. As always, let's get started. The two terrorists who shot and killed 15 people in Sydney have been identified as 50-year-old Sajid Akram, suspected to be of Pakistani origin, and his 20-year-old son Naveed, born in Australia. Sajid Akram was shot dead by the security forces in a counter-terror operation. His son Naveed was shot at, is critical, but is in custody. He's believed to be safe after the shooting in hospital. Naveed, incidentally, was on the radar of Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, or ASIO, 6 years ago for suspected association with those linked to the Islamic State or ISIS, Daesh. He was let off the radar only to surface at the time of this deadly massacre, the worst terror attack in Australia's history in the past 30 years.
Hanukkah celebrations at Sydney's iconic Bondi Beach on Sunday turned into sheer horror. A brazen terror attack on a crowded gathering has left at least 16 people dead. Two armed attackers opened fire on civilians. Panic-stricken revelers fled the beach. The police responded immediately. One attacker was shot dead while the second was shot at. He later surrendered, bleeding. The attackers were a father and son duo of Pakistani origin. 24-year-old Naveed Akram remains in critical condition, while his father, 50-year-old Sajid Akram, was killed on the spot. Amid the chaos, 43-year-old Ahmed Al-Ahmed, a Sydney fruit shop owner, displayed extraordinary courage, tackling and disarming one of the gunmen. The Australian Prime Minister called the attack shocking and distressing, a targeted terror strike against Jews, and pushed for stricter gun laws.
There is no place for this hate, violence and terrorism in our nation. Let me be clear, we will eradicate it. Amidst this vile act of violence and hate will emerge a moment of national unity, where Australians across the board will embrace their fellow Australians of Jewish faith at this dark moment for our nation.
The US President also condemned the attack.
Likewise in Australia, as you know, there was a terrible attack, 11 dead, 29 badly wounded. And that was an anti-Semitic attack, obviously. And I just want to pay my respects to everybody. I just want to pay my respects to the families. We also had 3 injured, but 2 of them are already out of the hospital and one's going to be okay.
Israel strongly condemned the assault, accusing Australia of ignoring warnings on rising anti-Semitism.
On August 17th, about 4 months ago, I sent Prime Minister Albanese of Australia a letter in which I gave him warning that the Australian government's policy was promoting and encouraging anti-Semitism in Australia.
The attack turned a moment of faith and festivity into chaos and bloodshed. A tragedy that has shaken Australia to its core. With Pranay Upadhyay, Bureau Report, India Today.
So Jewish families had gathered at the beach to mark the first night of Hanukkah, a celebration of faith, of heritage, of identity. But that very identity made them targets of radical Islamist terror. At least as of now, security agencies believe, or at least reports from Australia seem to indicate, that the suspected terrorists are of Pakistani origin. Anti-Semitism has surged across the world since the Israel-Gaza war erupted in October 2023. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hit out at the Australian government, saying he'd warned Anthony Albanese, but the Australian government policies rewarded the terrorists.
15 dead, scores injured, hundreds traumatized for life. Their crime, they belong to a community. Jewish families had gathered at Sydney's Bondi Beach to mark the first night of Hanukkah, a celebration of faith, of heritage, of identity. That very identity made them targets. Anti-Semitism has surged across the world since the Israel-Gaza war erupted in October 2023. And the numbers are stark. In regions like the United States and Europe, reported anti-Semitic incidents have nearly tripled. 14 innocent lives were lost in the Bondi Beach shooting. In Manchester, 2 people were stabbed to death at a community event in October. 2 more were killed in a shooting near the Capitol Jewish Museum in the heart of Washington, D.C. In Germany, a knife attack in February left 1 person injured. All major attacks, all in 2025 alone. Australia too had seen the warning signs, but they were ignored. Anti-Semitic incidents have risen sharply down under since the Israel-Gaza conflict began. In just the past year, Australia recorded 166 attacks targeting the Jewish community, with Sydney and Melbourne emerging as flashpoints. Aussie Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has acknowledged that this was an act of evil anti-Semitism.
An act of evil anti-Semitism, terrorism, that has struck the heart of our nation. An attack on Jewish Australians is an attack on every Australian. There is no place for this hate, violence and terrorism in our nation.
Yet he faces mounting criticism from Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who argues that the attack reflects a failure to act decisively against rising hate.
On August 17th, about 4 months ago, I sent Prime Minister Albanese of Australia a letter in which I gave him warning that the Australian government's policy was promoting and encouraging anti-Semitism in Australia.
And Netanyahu's warning may not be unfounded. Hamas has refused to express sympathy over the Bondi attack, instead issuing veiled threats of more such violence to come.
Personally, I feel Netanyahu is responsible for these acts that take place and cause hatred.
This was not an isolated act. And if extremist ideologies are to be stopped, the worst may have to move beyond words and adopt a far tougher, zero-tolerance approach. Bureau Report, India Today.
This rising threat of radical Islamist terror is a cause for grave concern, not just in India but across the world. India has been cautioning the world for decades, including cautioning the world about Pakistan's state-sponsored terror. But will the world wake up or continue to walk into one crisis after the other, eyes wide shut? Joining me on India First, Charles Thompson is an Australian journalist. Ray Locker is an author and analyst, joins us from Washington, D.C. Dr. Tara Karta is former director of India's National Security Council Secretariat. Sushant Sareen is senior fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. And Dr. Vikram Singh is a security affairs analyst and former DGP of the Uttar Pradesh Police. Charles Thompson, 2 shooters accounted for. Some reports seem to indicate a wider conspiracy, a suspected third shooter or someone who was aiding them, and more suspects. Any more details in public domain about the motive and whether there was a larger plot?
Okay, your voice is coming through crackly, but I think I've got the gist of what you're saying. I hope I'm clear and articulate to you. The issue here is that things can't go on. If we are we're a multicultural nation, many people are coming to our country, but there has to be certain rules, principles, and restrictions done. The current Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, and Home Minister have been given warning about this. They chose to ignore it. In fact, they blew the flames because they allowed large protest marches in Sydney by the Palestinians against the Jewish community. Now, my heart goes out also to the Palestinians in Palestine. I understand. But when you have something in a foreign country trying to allow it to go on our shores is just unacceptable. Now, what we hope for is not just for a few more rules, but there will have to be a dramatic change in how we deal with religious violence. There's just no other way to deal with this. And the problem is that many Australians now have lost faith in the current Prime Minister.
Oh, that's a big point you're raising. So I'll come to the politics of it in just a moment. But before I throw it open for a wider discussion, the older shooter, if you can hear me, was Sajid Akram. He'd lived in Australia since 1998 when he apparently came on a student visa. His son Naveed was born in Australia. Any details of what prompted them to kill innocent people on a beach?
Well, the first question is, we get many people coming on student visas and they put in dodgy applications and they get approved. So we all know this and they go to dodgy colleges. But the sad part about this is, and we all have to reflect as Australians on this, the son was born in Australia and therefore he was coached and led to this path. And we don't know yet. He did go to one institution. I'm not going to name it because we have to give them the benefit of the doubt for now. But an investigation is now happening about why the son, who's born in Australia, has such violent views against another community. And we just can't take this lying down anymore. There has to be, and the blame lies with our Prime Minister, our Foreign Minister, and our Home Minister. Our police, our intelligence services have been doing a marvellous job before and after. Warnings have been given, but the Prime Minister took no heed. And now he's responsible for what's happened. And unfortunately, everything I've heard from him now doesn't sound like a leader. He's got to come out and be absolutely steadfast. Now, another problem that we have in Australia is that after COVID, too many people at once were allowed in, causing all sorts of problems and aggregating. Because this is not just an issue of just one religion.
Okay.
This is an issue of when you bring in new people from different beliefs, different backgrounds, different religions, we all
Yes.
have to learn to live together.
But some may not want to coexist. And, India has dealt with that problem of Pakistan state-sponsored radical Islamist terror. Some reports seem to indicate, and you can shed more light, that these two suspected terrorists are, at least one of them is of Pakistani origin, the father. The son, as you pointed out, was born in Australia. Any clarity on whether there are other similar modules still at large in Australia?
Okay, your voice is cracking up, but if I got the gist of it, the difficult issue for us is with the country of Pakistan. Now, I have many Pakistani friends in Australia. They're law-abiding and loving citizens, but I don't understand why Pakistanis are involved in everything when terrorism is involved. It just befuddles me and confuses me. So now what has to happen is in future when people are coming from countries where there are genuine acts of terrorism happening in their country, just like there was happening between the Palestinians and the Israelis, we suddenly allowed a whole lot of people to come in very quickly. Now, this doesn't bring confidence to the general public. The government has to become more firm and follow the rule of law a lot more precisely.
Stay with me. There's a very interesting point you said. You have good Pakistani friends, but you're also surprised whenever there's terror, there is a Pakistani link or words to that effect. So, Shan Sareen, this is the worst terror attack in Australia in 30 years. The youngest victim was only 10. The oldest managed to survive Holocaust in Nazi Germany, but could not survive a radical Islamist terror attack. The threat is huge in Australia. What are you picking up?
Gaurav, the threat is not just huge in Australia, it's huge all over the world. Australia is just the latest victim, or this particular attack is just the latest manifestation of a threat that most other societies around the world face, including some Islamic societies. I think I should mention that. But I think in many Islamic societies, especially in places like UAE and others, they are not confused about the phenomena of jihad. They understand it. I'm afraid to some extent in India, but definitely in the Western countries, there is a complete and utter lack of understanding of the phenomena of jihad, how it kind of invades the mind, what kind of mindsets it gives rise to. We were hearing the gentleman from Australia who says that he's really surprised, how somebody who was born in Australia could be thinking like that. We've seen any number of examples of people who were born in France or in Belgium or in Canada or in the United States making a beeline for organizations like the ISIS or Al Qaeda or some of these other groups. So this is a phenomena people need to start understanding, and in the interest of political correctness, or because they are afraid that they will be labeled Islamophobic or racist or what have you, any of the other slurs which are generally hurled on people who are ready to talk the truth and point out to the reality of the matter. Because if you're going to be scared of being labeled such and you're not going to do something about it, then I'm afraid these are incidents that will continue to follow. Secondly, I think in places like Australia, very correctly put, there has been a kind of a two-tier kind of a policy on how to deal with the rising anti-Semitism, which was very visible to everybody in Australia. Not just anti-Semitism, anti-Hinduism. So, for example, a
Yes.
lot of the acts that have taken place against the Jews, we have seen Hindu temples being attacked. We have seen Hindu congregations being attacked. We have seen, vandalism around Hindu places of worship. All kinds of things we have seen. Have you seen any action by the Australian authorities? In Canada, in Australia, even in the United States, they've covered it up
Yes.
under freedom of speech and expression. The FBI suddenly seems to come to a complete halt, completely paralyzed when it comes to attacks on Hindus, for example. They probably still
That's
act
a
against
very interesting point you raise. Let me bring in Ray Locker. Let me bring in Ray Locker on this, for a perspective from Washington, D.C. The threat that is posed by radical Islamist terror, Australia is bleeding now. India has bled for decades. Washington, D.C., New York, the United States has bled. And yet, Ray Locker, do you agree that there is skepticism or fear or apprehension in going after the perpetrators of terror? Sushant Sareen says there's fear that you will be labeled as an Islamophobe if you call out terror. Is that also your understanding?
Look, I've been reporting on this for more than 30 years. Did stories when I worked in Florida about a group of Palestinian connected terrorists working out of the University of South Florida. My reporters and I worked with were called Islamophobes then. It happens now. I mean, that's kind of the go-to thing when you identify people who are Islamic, who are engaged in Islamic-based terrorism. And it's not to make a blanket assumption about any Muslim. Fact is, inside that religious group, there are people who find solace in jihadist ideology, and then they act upon it. And one of the ways you stop it is to work with religious leaders in any community to help tell you who are the people who are causing trouble. Because in a lot of cases, those folks are known. They're involved in the mosque community. People know that guy's a troublemaker. It seems like spying on people, but that's one way you keep track of people who might be a possible threat. And so, that happens. It's unfortunate. Look, just like there are white people who belong to Christian churches who act out upon, they kill black people or they do other attacks. It happens in every community. Now it's very glaring because it involves Muslims in the Pakistani community in Australia. It just happens in a lot of places. What makes me nervous is we have really kind of crippled our intelligence agencies in the United States. We fired a whole bunch of FBI people who are good, who are experts on this, because they're following, the directives of our current president. So, there are a lot of ways that you can stop this, and we need to be vigilant on all fronts.
Oh, absolutely, and not be scared of the cover fire, Dr. Tara Kartha. And I want to bring in Dr. Vikram Singh because he's somebody who's dealt with it on ground. But Dr. Tara Kartha, the cover fire that is given to radical Islamist terror, the moment you call it out, the moment you say that this is what is being preached in a certain mosque or a certain madrasa, you're called an Islamophobe. Now, in Australia, this is just the latest example. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he'd cautioned Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese 4 months ago. And according to him, nothing was done. The actions of the Australian government only encouraged anti-Semitism. You agree, ma'am?
I would absolutely agree. I mean, in terms of numbers, Australia is among the top 10 in terms of Palestinian protests. Now, again, like I said, I'm not saying Palestinians, they have their own issues, they have a problem, we need to recognize that, but there is a line you do not cross. And they crossed that line in Australia several times, and the authorities did nothing. So I think Netanyahu has a very good point here in terms of what Australia could have done to sort of reverse and just say this is not something you do in your country. I mean, just draw that line and say that, you know, you in any Hindu terrorist against Hindus, against anyone, not permissible. That's all we are asking the government to do. But Gaurav, I want to bring in one important thing here. See, it's the radicalism which has spread from Pakistan is something also which is overlooked. Many of these, like, you know, someone like Willie Bridget, French national, radicalized in Pakistan. The one in the San Bernardino shooting, which was in the US, which was one of the most horrific attacks, radicalized in Pakistan. A bunch of people in India, Kerala, who went and joined Islamic State and later turned up in Pakistan, radicalized. There are centers in Pakistan which are extremely good at this. They are very, very good at, they've been doing this for decades. That is something we need to watch out for, because this gentleman was in Australia since 1998. What turned him against the state? That's what we need to know.
And Dr. Vikram Singh, Pakistan is notorious. Pakistan is the Oxbridge of terror. While in this case, we are still waiting for an official confirmation about the origins of the terrorist. But when it comes to Pakistan state-sponsored radical Islamist terror, whether it was Osama bin Laden hiding in Abbottabad or the case that you dealt with personally, Daniel Pearl, his killer, Omar Said Sheikh, he was trained in Pakistan. Sir, what more can you tell us? In your views, why is the word apprehensive about nailing Pakistan state-sponsored radical Islamist terror?
Well, Gaurav, you have put $1 billion question and your voice was cracking. What I can comprehend is that the world has to come together to name and shame Pakistan, because it is the epicenter of all terrorist activity. If there is a terrorist action or an incident in Australia, can Pakistan be far behind? You can see how well trained the father and the son are, and to buy 6 weapons for a person who's immigrated to Australia for education and for a better life, there was no reason for them to buy 6 weapons. You see the stance and the firing prowess of the son, Naveed, and you can see that he fired 4 rounds in 4 seconds. And the stance, and you, since you are very keen on arms and ammunition and combat strategies, you'd understand that he took considerable training. It seems would be online or offline or trained by his handlers. I dare say that he had handlers who prompted him to do what he did, the father and son. They had gone there to Australia for a better life. An open society, a magnanimous society welcomed them. And this is what they gave in return, that they shot dead 16 people in cold blood. Well, I would say I had expected, and I totally agree with the indignation of Mr. Charles Thompson, that Australia could have done much better. But we applied Band-Aid to terminal cancer. We did not do what we expected to do. So whispered sweet nothing, and for what? So that we may not be called racist or Islamophobic. Well, if we are branded Islamophobic or racist, so be it. But terrorism has to be wiped out.
Oh, absolutely. Charles Thompson, do you see that kind of willpower in Australia after this attack to wipe out terror? Or, as Dr. Vikram Singh said, it's like applying Band-Aid on the cancer of terror?
Okay, once again, your voice is cracking, but I think I've got the gist of it. Look, I must tell you, this will profoundly change Australia. Make no doubt, every single person in the country is angry. And they're angry at our own government. And there is no way that things can stay the same. Things will have to change. You see, when we had the last massacre, which was an absolute tragedy also, and that was not to do with religion, that was a crazy guy, we brought in the best and the strongest gun laws in the country, so in the world. And yet, here we have some guy illegally having 6 guns and carrying them around with him. And now we find he's also got bombs in his car. Now, this is extraordinary. This is a complete and utter wake-up call for the whole country. And I can assure you that things will not stay the same now. And our politicians, if they don't listen, they'll be gone. Because I can assure you that over time, Australians are getting very, very angry. We're happy to be multicultural. We love our people, but that doesn't mean the rule of law is not applied to all people under all circumstances. And vetting must be done when people
Okay.
come to an island nation.
Sure. Ray Locker, we saw tremendous anger even in the United States of America post 9/11. The then President George Bush said, you're either with us or against us, and then they got the world to be with them, and naturally so. But the same America is now consorting with a state sponsor of radical Islamist terror like Pakistan. So despite Pakistan being involved in the killing of over 2,000 American soldiers in Afghanistan. So are those lessons not learned? Does America lack institutional memory, or are there other games at play here?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, we've crippled the FBI's counterterrorism ability because we fired so many people, because maybe they were alleged to have been involved in prosecuting Trump for his previous actions as president, like on January 6, 2021. That's not helping. We have blinded ourselves in a lot of ways because we decided that the intelligence community is somehow part of some deep state that's out to do things against Trump. That's a mistake. Cozying up to members of the Pakistani government and people from Pakistan, also a mistake. I mean, we've had their top general here hanging out in the Oval Office, while at the same time we're putting a 50% tariff on Indian goods. It doesn't make any sense. So in this country, we need more stable leadership at the very top, and we need to get people back into places like the FBI and the CIA who know what they're doing and who aren't driven by some kooky ideology that thinks that anybody who's an expert is somehow against the president. That's a problem. And then we got to work with people in various communities to say, look, we support you being here. We want you to live here and enjoy your life. But if you know somebody who's active against the U.S. interests or who wants to kill somebody, you need to tell us.
Yes.
And that takes years to do.
Okay. Sushant Sareen, neither Australia nor Europe and perhaps not even America, they've woken up, to the threat that's posed by this mindset, this radical Islamist mindset, whether it's Islamic State or Lashkar-e-Taiba or Jaish-e-Mohammed or Al-Qaeda. I mean, they're children of the same radical Islamist mindset. Why is it that the West is not waking up to this threat in your view?
Gaurav, I think one of the fundamental problems in the West is that while they have the scholarship, they will study all the documents, they will document everything. The scholarship is of a very high quality. The problem is that they look at this problem from a Western perspective, from their mindset. They don't put themselves in the minds of the guys whom they are studying. So they don't understand because they think that, look, everybody is the same, everybody is a person like us. Maybe there is something which has, ticked wrongly in their brains and we can fix it. That's not how it works. You have to understand where the motivation of that guy is coming from, and that is where these guys fail to understand it. So, for example, in this particular case, you knew that there was this guy, you were keeping him under watch 5 or 6 years back, right?
Yes.
And then you felt he's a normal guy, he's probably just very reclusive, he's not somebody who socializes, but maybe he's okay, he's not a danger to society. Little realizing that, jihadism is like a narcotic, it's like alcoholism. Once it enters your brain, even if you go through rehabilitation, it can trigger off at any point in time. Now, we don't know what the exact circumstances in this father-son duo is, but these are issues which need to be studied far more closely, and people who you suspect of it can never be left unmonitored. I know that's easier said than done, but frankly, don't do it. Then the problem is what you saw 2 days back in Australia.
But Dr. Tara Kartha, because you've studied the subject, Dr. Vikram Singh studied the subject and very extensively. Now we've been suffering this terror for decades. It's not as if it just cropped up last week. I mean, in India, we've been suffering this through the 1980s in Punjab, 1990s in Kashmir, and then rest of our country. We know the world watches this. We're a transparent country, and yet they don't wake up. Why aren't they waking up, and what needs to be done? The last 30 seconds I have on this part of the show, because then I want to come to that charge sheet story, the NIA charge sheet on Pahalgam. But Dr. Tara Kartha, your take on this?
See, in part, it's also our fault. You remember that Fahid, what was his name? Fahim Khalid Lodi, Australian. He was
Yes.
plotting an attack with Lashkar-e-Taiba, Willie Bridget, Lashkar-e-Taiba, again in Australia. Where have you ever followed up? Have you ever gone out and said, look, our narrative also needs to be strengthened? If I talk about Pakistan, people say, okay, this is an India-Pakistan thing. You need to get it out of that frame. It is not an
Yes.
India-Pakistan thing. This is a worldwide. I think I just saw that map. Oh my God, the number of countries where Pakistanis are involved, either
Yes.
directly or indirectly. And we don't follow up. So we really
Oh,
need
absolutely. And perhaps, Mr. Thompson and Mr. Locker, in their respective countries, there will be realization that whether it's the Jews who are being targeted or Hindu temples that are being targeted or gurdwaras that are being targeted, the perpetrators remain the same. It's the same ideology. The money flows from the same people. And if they're a threat to Jews and Hindus today, there will be a threat to everyone else who doesn't believe in their ideology tomorrow. And that's a story we'll be tracking very closely. Dr. Vikram Singh, Sushant Sareen, and Dr. Tara Kartha, stay with me. Mr. Locker and Mr. Thompson, many thanks for joining me. Welcome back. The NIA has filed its charge sheet in the Pahalgam terror attack case after 8 months of the terror attack. And India Today gets you details of that charge sheet. India Today has learned that the charge sheet names the Lashkar-e-Taiba and the Resistance Front as the terrorist organization that carried out this terror attack. The charge sheet, according to sources, says that Lashkar-e-Taiba and the Resistance Front planned, funded and executed the Pahalgam terror attack. It was religion-based killing by Pakistani-backed terrorists. Now, it goes on to say that Hindus were singled out because the terrorists, they asked people to recite the kalma, and if they couldn't, they were killed. We are also being told by our sources that the charge sheet names the Pakistani handler, terrorist Sajid Jatt of the Lashkar-e-Taiba. He was the plotter of this terror attack and he's been named as an accused. So once evidence against Sajid Jatt is put out in public domain and goes through courts of law, India is expected to move for action against him. Will it be taken or not? Clearly, with a state sponsor of radical Islamist terror like Pakistan, led by an army chief, a radical Islamist himself, Asim Munir, action is unlikely. But legally, India is following due process. India Today can also tell you that 3 Pakistani terrorists who were killed in Operation Mahadev have also been named. And the two accused from Jammu and Kashmir who harbored these terrorists have also been named here. So legally, India is building a strong case, like many times in the past, including 26/11 Mumbai terror attacks. But perhaps Pakistan, a state sponsor of radical Islamist terror, understands only Brahmos ki bhasha and not Aman ki asha. It just does not understand charge sheets and documents submitted. But anyway, India tries. With me on this broadcast, Dr. Vikram Singh stays with me, Dr. Tara Kartha and Sushant Sareen are with me. Dr. Vikram Singh, now that the charge sheet has been filed, does it serve any purpose? Because you've dealt with these cases right from the time that Omar Said Sheikh and that Maulana of terror, Masood Azhar, was caught in India and he was languishing in jail. We let him off and then he's been spreading terror in our country for decades now.
Gauravji, good evening once again. I would say that yes, a very formidable charge sheet of 1597 pages, and that too after taking extra time from the NIA court. I would say that they have incorporated all the rudimentary facts. As you very rightly mentioned in your opening remarks, that they have named Lashkar-e-Taiba, TRF, and other terrorists, both the 3 who were killed after encounters during the course of Operation Mahadev, and also Sajid Jatt and others. But to your loud question and the million-dollar question would be, Pakistan is a willing accessory to the entire terrorist actions and the depredations in India, and therefore it will be a difficult nut to crack. But in the changed circumstances, in the changed environment, you would remember that the cabinet had resolved that Operation Sindoor would be an ongoing process and every terror act would be taken as an act of war. I would say this is the extension of that act of war perpetrated by Pakistan and thrust upon us. And therefore, this charge sheet can have national, bilateral, and international ramifications because the legal consequences, both of because the UAPA and other logistics, they have international ramifications and logistics. Therefore, Pakistan cannot claim the alibi because the evidence that have been given can be given to the international platform arena and other fora where it will be raised that Pakistan stands exposed badly today because the evidence collected by the NIA, I'm given to understand, is absolutely A-class and incontrovertible because of the transcript, interceptions, confessions, and also you may recall that those who have been arrested, the Bashir Ahmad Jothar and Parvez Ahmad Jothar, have also given very incriminating accounts of those who they sheltered and those whom they aided and abetted in the perpetration of this horrible massacre. Therefore, I would say but Pakistan is an old and a very slippery customer, as also the Lashkar-e-Taiba.
So what does one hope to achieve through this charge sheet, Dr. Tara Kartha? You've dealt with cases including 26/11 Mumbai terror attacks, where India gave dossier after dossier after dossier to Pakistan. They only carried out more terror attacks in our country.
Well, actually, initially, I mean, this is the interesting part. Initially, they did carry out some activity in terms of the data which we gave. But once the army stepped in, that was the end of it. So the problem is and always has been the Pakistani army and its dreadful intelligence agency. I mean, these are goons. They are thieves. They are extortionists. This is a terrible agency which has slid from being a classic intelligence to I don't know what it is now. So nonetheless, the fact that NIA has made this, and Sajid Dutt is well known to us for some years now. He's not a new actor. That they've been able to nail this guy means, like he said, clear evidence. Once you have this, you are up on the international stage to say, now take action. And you have to, this time, we will follow through. We're not going to let this go. And I don't see this government letting this go at any time in the near future. So that is the point that we need to follow up on.
You know, that's an interesting point you made there, Sushant Sareen, that when there's a civilian government, at least there's some pretense of action or initial action is taken. The accused are put behind bars, even if it's global pressure. But the moment the army takes over, then it's back to normal or back to square one. Right now, the army runs Pakistan. Asim Munir is all-powerful field marshal who can never be prosecuted, he can never be charged, but he runs that country. So do we expect any action, or the only help this provides is nail the local support terrorists had?
No, you have to nail the local support the terrorists have, and you cannot be under any illusion. And please, Yar Gaurav, don't distinguish between the civilian and the government, the military, in Pakistan. They are one and the same. The civilians are used to basically play the good cop, and the military plays the bad cop. So if after the Mumbai attacks, for example, if the Pakistanis were trying to show that they are taking some action, that was just for international show, and then finally they clamped down. And so don't distinguish between the two. Second, and I think more importantly, I think we need to be very clear what we hope to achieve. One, lawfare is a very, very essential part of fighting this war. Now, it might seem that, people are wasting their time by building up these cases. A 1,600-page charge sheet, I believe, would have all the evidence, as Dr. Vikram Singh very correctly is saying. It would be pretty watertight, the kind of case that would have been built up in this charge sheet with a 1,600-page, charge sheet which has been presented. So this is part of that lawfare. And yes, you can take it to international forums, but don't expect either Interpol or anybody else to act on it. But I think we need to make certain changes in our own laws. For example, we must have a provision for trial and punishment in absentia. And once you give punishment in absentia, so for example, this third-rate, low-life scumbag Sajid Jatt, who has been named, who my friend, Dr. Kartha is very familiar with. A character like him, if he is, for example, prosecuted even in absentia, and you sentence him to death, you can you can announce an international reward for getting him dead or alive. So put a bounty on these buggers, right? You have to do something more than what is just simple lawfare. Lawfare is extremely important because if tomorrow things change, somebody asks you what's the case you have against him, you can slap this 1600-page thing on whoever asks you that question. So you have to build up that.
Very pertinent point you raised there. Dr. Tarakartha, you want to quickly comment on the point that there's no difference between civilian leadership in Pakistan and military leadership in Pakistan. Ek Nagnath hai, ek Sapnath hai. They're just same. One provides cover fire to the other.
No, that's not always true. I mean, I have been repeatedly saying, I'm not saying Pakistan is an ideal state, it is not. It has gone way down in terms of the danger it poses to itself. But they have been, and I know some of them, police officers who have taken this seriously for their own good, and as you said, due to international pressure. But the moment the army steps in, then all of this goes. I mean, you had Nawaz Sharif went on, I mean, perhaps he didn't go on record, but I'm telling you this. He said, every time I take an action to befriend India, there is a terrorist attack. Why is this happening? So this is a very clear pattern. And I can tell you countless cases where we have tried to, I mean, Modi ji tried to reach out. It was all stopped by the Pakistan army and the ISI.
Okay.
So
the last 30 seconds that I have on this part of the show, Dr. Vikram Singh, Sushant Sareen makes a very interesting point. Start punishing these terrorists in absentia and put out a reward on their head and start paying anybody in Pakistan who would then, neutralize them. Is that something that India must do? Play a game to ensure Indians are safe, Sam Dam Dandbhed.
Absolutely, but I'm happy to let everybody know that the Bharatiya Nagrik Suraksha Sanhita, the successor to the Criminal Procedure Code, now has a provision for trial in absentia, especially in respect of proclaimed offenders and those charged with serious offences. Therefore, it is not an impediment. But to the larger question raised by the learned Mr. Sushant Sareen ji is that to what extent will Pakistan, even suppose in a conjecture that you convict a person and sentence him to death or life again, how will you ever in a moment think that Pakistan will extradite such person or hand him over to India?
Absolutely. That Pakistan will never do. So Hafiz Saeed and Masood Azhar and all the terrorists, whether they wear their Ucha Takhna ka pajama or, okay, Sushant sir, you want to quickly comment, but I'll have to comment for another time because I've run out of time, or they wear the khaki uniform. Okay, one sentence. Go on, Sushant Sareen.
So, to the last point which Dr. Vikram Singh raised, go and see Dhurandhar, yaar. Send a Dhurandhar and bump the buggers off, yaar. End of the story.
Absolutely.
Or the amount of money India has, you don't even need to send somebody from here. Let them do the needful. You have enough money to ensure that Hafiz Saeed lives and dies in fear. So does Maulana Masood Azhar, so does Dawood Ibrahim, and those in uniform in Pakistan who've bled India. They must never feel safe. Because one thing, even the Ramcharitmanas has very clearly said, Bhai bin hoye na preet. So Pakistan must fear you. That has to be very clear. I want to thank all of you for joining me on this India First special. We'll track the story very closely.